My name's Ralph, and I'm an addict. First of all, I'd like to thank God for the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous and you people for being here. I know this is a dual diagnosed facility for alcoholics and addicts. I understand that, and thank God for recovery houses. I don't know if I would have made it if it wasn't for this recovery house. It ended up being where I needed to be at some point at some time in my life, because I don't know what happened to me. But all I can tell you is that, I heard that recovery houses were for discovery, and that a 12-step fellowship was for recovery. I mean, it's kind of, once you leave a facility like this, it gets real. You can say all you can say here, but it gets real once you leave. So what I came to believe is that you need to have a set of meetings that you go to. Meetings are like, for me, meetings were the backbone of my recovery. And this town had a lot of meetings back then before that COVID hit. And there was a lot of meetings, and I was already plugged into a lot of meetings, but later I was to hear that the steps were the heartbeat. Let me say that again, that Narcotics Anonymous was meetings were the backbone of my recovery. And later I was to hear that the steps were the heartbeat. And this whole thing is about peace of mind. And for me, it's about the process and the journey. Everybody has to go through a process to stay here, and everybody has a journey. What I can tell you is journey well, my friends, because what's going to happen to you if you're really serious about changing your life, the process and the journey, you're going to find yourself inside yourself and not realize that you had lost yourself a long time ago. And in the process of working steps, you're going to go way back, and I'm talking about way back, to find out where it all came from and why you fucked up and how you got to where you are today in your life. And so I'm gonna try to run through this like the gentleman John said, what it was like, how I got here, and what it's like today, hopefully in that order. Working steps and not realizing that it was gonna free me from myself. I didn't jump into it. I wasn't gung ho for it. Took a long time. And for me, let's put it like this. I got sober in 87 and I got clean in 88 in Fred Brown's recovery house, Santa Cruz Street. And I say that because, that's how it was. And I started the process. I started to work the steps. And what I can tell you is that this whole thing is about peace of mind. And the longer you stay, the greater the peace. And it's like learning how to maintain peace of mind throughout life on life's terms, maintaining, not losing your composure, learning how to apply acceptance and surrender and surrender, acceptance, and being powerless. Those are heavy words. If you're new, you truly don't understand them until for me, it took a lot of years to get in those positions of beating myself up, not understanding that I'm gonna tell you, self fucks self by the choices and decisions you make. I've been here too long. I can never blame anybody. Oh, he did this or she said that, because that thing I told you about peace of mind? Once you learn and you get in the process and learn about acceptance, powerless, and all that, you learn to see what's inside somebody else. And it's like, you can see when somebody's carrying the poison. That's what I call it, anger, resentment, hatred, jealousy, all that. And you can spot it because we look inside ourselves and we start to find out what's wrong with us. And we start to understand those are poisons, and people carry them and they just want to spit it on somebody because they don't know what else to do. And so when you put yourself in that position and you don't really have that much recovery, you're going to spit it right back because that's all you know at that time in your life. And I don't live that way. So I can never, what I'm saying is that I can never, blame anybody for how I feel, because I've been here too long and I know better. So I can never blame anybody for what goes on in my life. I can apply the acceptance. I can apply the surrender. I can be powerless when I know I need to be. So I don't beat myself up. I didn't come here and get clean this long to beat myself up. I mean, it doesn't matter, you know, all we got is today, and on any given day, shit'll show up, it doesn't matter, but the faith that you develop from being in this fellowship, like for me, I believe with a loving God and Narcotics Anonymous, there ain't shit I can't handle. I already heard it all in the rooms, people gone through this and people gone through that, lost kids. One guy, he lost his wife and his mother in the same week, you know, and he gone through that without getting loaded. So anyways, what it was like for me is like, you know, my dad died, I was going on 5 years old. He died from cirrhosis of the liver. He was 30 years old. And so this was like 1960, almost 1960, right? And what happened was, we were living over here, right? And my mom, my grandparents had said, send the kids over here and we'll take care of them. And so, you know, a single mom with 3 kids, you know, I had a brother who was older, 1 year like, and a sister who was younger. And so here I am, getting ready to go to kindergarten, 4 years old, and we go all the way to San Diego, where I don't even know these grandparents. I don't know nobody in the house. And I just got, you know, it took me a while to realize that I didn't, besides not having a father, I didn't have a mother. But I never looked at that. I kept looking at my dad, you know, I didn't have a father, and that was the problem. Because when I went to go live with my grandparents, I'd say about, you know, I started to get a little close, and I was real quiet, and they were real quiet in that house. There was no, you know, chaos and that kind of shit. And, you know, they had me go to church, and I was going to start kindergarten, right? And what happened was about a year later, my grandfather dies. No, my grandmother dies. And then about a year after that, my grandmother dies. So that fucked me up, you know. What I realized is that I didn't want nothing to do with love. Love was painful, you know. So not realizing what happened to me is that I learned to shut down. I learned not to feel, and I learned that I was different, you know. And I started school. I remember I had little things I went through, painful things and shit. But I remember one day this kid, you know, and he invited me to his house, and I went there. My first experience with a friend, you know. I'm like, I don't know, 6, maybe 7. He invited me to his home. And when I got there, I got all fucked up, man. What I identify as fear, that's when it first hit me, because when I went in his house, you know, his whole family was there. He had his own room, he had toys. And what the fear was, I was afraid they were going to ask me about my mother or my father. I was afraid they were going to ask me, and I didn't want, you know. What I realize now is that I was stuffing feelings and emotions, because there was no therapy, there was no nothing. It's like, just stick it in there and leave it in there and don't talk about it. That's all I knew, and nobody talked about it. You know, they didn't know how to nurture. They didn't know how to nurture anybody at that time. You know, there was no group, there was no therapy or go see the psych or go see whatever. They didn't have none of that in those days. So what happened is, it made me real uncomfortable. I knew I was different. I started to realize that I created a fear from anybody who was nice and had that. I didn't want to get by them. It stuck like that for my whole life. Like, I remember going to school and seeing a nice girl, and I knew I couldn't be with her. I knew she was, but I knew I couldn't, because not knowing, I felt less than, I wasn't good enough, right? So 5 years later, I come back. My mom brings us back, and it's not the same. It's never going to be the same, you know, because, like I said, not until I got in recovery that I realized I didn't even have a mother, and I stayed there for 5 years, and we came back and went to school. And then, you know, what happened to me is that, you know, I was, like I said, I couldn't just be friends with anybody. You know, like, if your parents were there, I didn't want to go to your house. I didn't want to, you know, I hung out with kids in the street. We stayed out. Back then, it was safe and shit. And so what happened is, I would look for the fellas, like, I knew that somebody was missing in the home, like the dad wasn't there. So I knew he wasn't going to ask me, and I wasn't going to ask him shit. We were just going to, you know, run the streets. And that's who I cling to, people like that could stay out late and hang around the streets and do that kind of shit. And then eventually it graduated to like sniffing glue, stealing cars, you know, getting arrested here and there, and not knowing that the disease for an addict is that, we hide it and we need to fix on something, whatever it is, to hide the emotions and feelings so that I don't have to feel those emotions and whatever it is, acting out as a fool. Yeah, I'll join in, we'll go do this and do that. And then later it turned into the drugs, started smoking weed, LSD, Reds, that kind of shit. And what I'm going to tell you is that in the end, I was slamming coke, slamming heroin, smoking rock, and couldn't stop. And I had been arrested a shitload of times, and gone to prison, and the crimes, they were escalating. I started doing crazier shit behind I gotta have it. It just like I gotta have it, and I never thought about consequences or anything like that. And so what happened was, I was shooting dope with this girl, and her parents lived up there in PV, and she had money, right? And so one day we're shooting dope, and she puts on a tape, and I go, "What's that?" And she was listening to AA tapes, recovery tapes, right? And she go, "Oh, she had money. She would beat cases by going to recovery houses." And all as I heard was, "You mean you can go there and stay?" And she said, "Yeah." And I go, "Really?" And then, that's what opened up my mind to because I knew that, I was going down bad, and it was like, like I said, the crimes were escalating, and it opened my mind. I go, "You mean I can go there and stay there?" She said, "Yeah." And so she was going to go because she wasn't going to go to jail if she went, right? And so she shot me a number and said, "Here, call this number up," right? And I called it up, and it was an alcoholic detox. And so I called the number, they ran the routine, and they said, "Hey, have you ever used any, I said I'm an alcoholic, but my home is Narcotics Anonymous. Don't get me wrong, right? And she says, "Have you ever used any drugs?" And I go, "Nah." "Yeah." And she goes, "When?" I go, "Like maybe 6 months ago." "What kind?" I said, "Coco." "You can't come in." I'm telling you the way it was back then, okay? "You can't come in." All right, hung it up. And I started drifting away again, like not even realizing that, I was trying to change my life. I was trying to go where I don't even know where I'm going. I just needed to get the fuck away from where I was living, anywhere, right? And she called me up one more time. Thank God, she called me one more time, and she said, "Call him again." And so I called him again, and they went through the routine again. The thing was, they never asked me my name. And so I called him again. He said, "What's your name?" And I told him, "Have you ever used any drugs?" I said, "No." And they said, "Well, come on in, we got a bed." I go, "Right now?" They said, "Yeah, right now." And I go, "Fuck, I'm thinking I got to get more fucked up in order to get in the place." Right? So I get there, right? I'm fucked up when I get in there, and this place is this is a 7-day alcoholic detox. Okay, it's co-ed. 7 days, that's it. I go in there, everybody's an addict. They ain't talking about it because you can't stay in the facilities. As a matter of fact, the alcoholic recovery homes weren't having it either. So I stayed there, and I'm going to tell you, I don't think I got a day clean or a day sober, whatever. When I got in there, I was fixing dope. It was co-ed. It was on. You know what I'm saying? And he even walked out in the back somehow. I think we smoked a little weed or something because they had like a back door. And the only thing that happened to me in there that I took with me that was some type or some part of recovery is one person told me, "You're not going to make it." And I didn't know what he meant. That's the only thing that stuck in my, "You're not going to make it." And I after the 7 days, I don't know if they come in, but when you knew when you get here, you really can't hear and you really can't see. Even though you think you do or you think you can, my experience is that I couldn't. It took some time to realize, to see and hear what I needed to hear that was going to benefit my life, that was going to put me in the direction that I needed to go. Now, even though I don't know where I'm going, I just need to get the fuck out from where I'm doing. I need something different. I don't know how it's going to work, if it's going to work. I just want to get away. That's all I knew, right? So the 7 days is up. My brother comes by, gives me like $40. They're gonna drive me to the men's 12-step house in Long Beach, which is an alcoholic recovery home. The day I get there, they tell me, "Oh, you can run the streets and come back tonight at 10 o'clock." I'm like, "Fuck, man!" They throw me out. I ain't got nothing. So I'm running the streets. I'm over there getting a little fucked up and shit. And I sneak back in. I look at the steps a couple times, and it was a workhouse. You had to have a job. You had to go do day labor to pay the rent that day. So I do like day labor. Anyway, I didn't last there. It was a couple of days, whatever. And I it closed the doors on me. They know I was fucked up. And they said, "No, you can't come here." I slept in some hotel in the lobby or something. And that friend of mine, she told me, so I'm going to tell it to you. She told me that I deserve the best. And I kind of like, nah. So I'm telling you, if you knew you deserve the best, believe me. So she knew I was a vet, right? I'd been in the military, right? She goes, "Go to the K2 over there in Long Beach." So I applied to get in there, and they said, "Well, you need a couple days, cleaned up, whatever, right?" And so I tried not to do anything. I might have smoked a little bit of weed, but finally they let me in there. It was a 21-day detox, okay? And so when I got there, I pretend I was in the military all over. I had this old man wake me up like clockwork at 5 o'clock, and I run the facility, and I do what I do when I get in those type of facilities. I start getting strong. I start doing what I do, right? And so one day we go out to group therapy. The doctor comes out. We're sitting in a circle, and he says, "You know what's wrong with you?" And I go, "No." He says, "You're sick." And I sat there, and I'm physically fit. I'm good to go, right? He says, "You're sick." And I sat there and I thought about it. I go, I must be sick. What the fuck am I doing in the hospital, right? What the fuck am I doing in the hospital? But it kind of clicked, the open mind. The reading was about closed-minded today anyway. It kind of clicked. And when they said I was sick and I suffered from a disease, now I want to know what you're talking about, this disease. And he talked about the physical allergies, the mental obsessions, right? I can't remember the one, right? But it was physical allergies, mental obsession, right? And so I started relating to myself. I started thinking, I go, fuck, I mean, I had that GTA and I went in this boost and all that shit. And then I went to go score, and all of a sudden I was getting sick, right? I said, "Man, I got to get a beer or something in me before I can go get some heroin," right? And so the physical allergies and the mental obsession that I got to get this motherfucker no matter what, right? So there it is. They're part of the disease right there. And so I became willing to want to know more, right? So I stayed the 21 days, and I didn't get loaded. 21 days. So now I'm going over here to this alcoholic recovery house, which is the Beacon. I'm going to try to keep this real quick into the recovery house, right? Now I'm over here at the Beacon House. I'm doing, what I related to my father. He died from cirrhosis of liver, 30 years old. So, I wanted to die the same way from alcohol, right? And so I ended up in the Beacon House. It's an alcoholic recovery home, and everybody there, same thing. All the guys I hung out with, they were addicts, but nobody would talk about it. The director at the time, he kind of knew, he pulled me in his room, in his office, and he started to ask me, and I was like, but I trusted him, and so I told him, yeah, I do drugs, man. And he goes, "Well, you should go to Narcotics Anonymous meetings." And I go, "Yeah," but he didn't kick me out. He let me stay there, right? And what happened to me is that that same girl was staying around the corner in the House of Hope. And she had a car, and then so you start to feel good. 30 days, whatever, man. I went somewhere, I shot some dope, just half a spoon, just enough to make me feel good, and I was like, yeah, I'm good. I went back. Nobody didn't feel I didn't have a guilty conscience or anything. But what happened was it woke up the beast. And I'm gonna tell you, in Pedro, in 88, 87, that rock cocaine was on all the corners around here. It would have been all around here. And so, I started smoking rock. I started shooting dope, and then and I was going crazy, man. And they used to have meetings in the house, right? And I walked in, and I swear to God, I thought they wanted me to tell them myself, like they waiting for me to share, put your hand up, and talk about it. And I'm like, oh, I was going crazy, man. Like I was emotionally fucking hurt, man. I was like, I had to go in and talk to the director and tell him, I can't stay here anymore. He goes, "Why?" And I go, "I got loaded." And he didn't know. And I go, and so I asked him, can I spend the night here one more night? And he goes, "Yeah." So he let me spend the night, one more night, and then maybe the 1 or 2 days I stayed in somebody's car behind the facility, right in the Beacon house. But there was somebody that was in that house who directed me. He goes, there's another house. They took my money away from me to hold it. There's another house over there, Fred Brown's on Santa Cruz. And I was like, yeah. And then so thank God the next day I went up there, right, to Fred's house. And so I go to Fred's house, and it's all they do is go to Narcotics Anonymous, right? Now I've just been drilled with AA, and what happened in the recovery house, I'm going to tell you because this is the way it was. Okay, that's why they say their hard-won experience gave birth to the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous. Even though we know the steps and the traditions, it all comes from Alcoholics Anonymous, and it says, thank God for that fellowship. Okay, respect that fellowship. Respect. If you're going to go to two fellowship, you got to learn to just respect it. That's all I'm going to tell you, man. You're going to find yourself inside of yourself and find out where your home is and where you need to be. Okay, but learn what it is to respect the fellowship, because they didn't want me talking about drugs in that fellowship, the other one, right? So I get to Fred's house, and I was on GR. I was on parole. Fred's house, you had to have a job to get in there. I didn't have a job. I was on GR. And I was the first guy, he was going to try it before he started opening up to this mass production, which is here today, right? And he goes, I'm gonna try it with you, me on GR. And he knew I was enrolled to school at Harbor Rock. I took a plumbing class, and it was like right down the street, so it worked out for me. But I had to do little odd end jobs, to like pay the rest of the rent. I even painted his daughter's bedroom. I used to ride a bike to PV to go do like clean up yard work and stuff to get the money to pay the rent, to stay there. And eventually start to, build myself up, like going to school. And then finally in the school, they came and got me, took me to a job. I didn't have a car, right? And like about a year later, I finally got a car and a truck, and I started working, and then I started moving up the ladder. Fred had 3 rules in his house. No fixing, fucking, or fighting. Those were the rules. That's all he had. It wasn't like this when you guys are locked in. We hit the streets. I mean, there was guys that were down in the corner, and we see them, and then they get kicked out or whatever, right? And all, the shit was on, and one guy lifted up his mattress. He had half pints all across the bed during when we were having our meetings in the house and shit. But it was a little more wild back there. It was a little more freedom. But if you were sincere and you plugged into meetings, like I said, that's the backbone. Eventually you're going to hear what you need to hear, and you're going to continue on the journey. You're going to start to find yourself and do what you need to do to stay and enjoy life. And so I was there, I stayed there for 18 months, okay? And what happened was, there was a guy in school, and he told me he needed a roommate. He lived on Pacific, at the end of Pacific Avenue, across the street from where Fred was living, right on the corner. You go all the way up Pacific, and then you're right at the cliff, right? The apartment's right there on the left is where I was staying. And let me tell you this guy I knew from school, he said, I need a roommate, and I've been there 18 months, and I really knew that, it's time to go, it was, the rules were like, getting a little, and so I said, okay. And I was paying less money in that apartment than I was paying the rent at Fred Brown's recovery house. But the best thing for me is that it was a safe place. Up there on top of that mountain, up there on the cliff right there, it's real quiet, it's real peaceful. There's no activity going on. There was a nice little store, whatever, and I was involved with life. And then what happened to me, I was living with a roommate, and then it started getting a little, he moved out. I tried to keep it by myself. I knew I couldn't. So eventually the manager, he gave me a 1-bedroom apartment on 14th Street in Pacific, like right around the corner almost. I stayed there, but I was plugged into meetings, man. I had a job, and I'd go to meeting almost every night. And I stopped at this taco truck, and then I'd go to watch the news and go to bed. And then finally, like give it a couple of months, I found comfort. I found like it's okay, The fear, when I was living alone, I had these guys that were my friends in recovery house, and they was on that pipe and smoking that rock, trying to sell me shit, coming to my door and shit, and making me like, man, crazy a little bit. And eventually I started to grow, you know what I mean? I started to grow, like I said, I was a vet. I ended up buying a house, ended up getting married, and let me see. anyways, I stayed 18 months and I moved out, and I ended up, just moving up in life and stuff, and still going to meetings. And I had a problem getting sponsors, man. It wasn't easy for me to find a sponsor in Narcotics Anonymous because, there wasn't a lot of them back then. There wasn't a lot of NA meetings back then, and it started to grow and stuff. And then I got a sponsor. I started to work the steps, and then, it took me a long time. And then I started, and I'm going to tell you, the third step, made a decision to turn my will and my life over to the care of God, right? Well, by the time I got to the 11th step, it was almost the same thing as that, made a decision to turn my will and could, his, I said up there, man, I can't, I'm not good at memorizing, right? But I started crying years later, because I knew that I was doing God's will. And let me see, man. No, I ain't got time for that one. Anyways, so, I just kept going on with life. And then I tell you, I finally had this one sponsor. I had him for like 18 years. He died with like 41 years clean, like a year before the COVID. And when the COVID hit, what happened? I don't know where you guys were at that time, but it was like quiet. It went like dead. They went to the Zoom meetings and stuff. And I didn't have a sponsor. And I knew that I needed to get another sponsor. I'm going to tell you, so this is what I'm going to tell you. I was like 32 years clean, right? When he like 31, when he passed, I knew I couldn't get one during the COVID. And then finally they opened up the meetings, and there was a convention in Narcotics Anonymous, San Fernando, where it started. And I was there, and I knew I was going to find a sponsor. And I'm going to tell you, 33 years clean, I know that I still need a sponsor, and I found him in the rooms at that convention. So I have a sponsor. 33 years later, I still need a sponsor. And so what I'm going to tell you about this is that through the journey and the process, you're going to find yourself inside yourself, and you have to know who you are and what you're about, what your purpose, what your desires are. And that's inside you, but that's through a journey and a process that you have to take. So I'm going to tell you, I'm going to end. This is how I usually end. I'm going to tell you what I'm about, because I take a lot of journeys on myself. I'm always looking at myself, a God of my own understanding, spiritual principles. Spirituality is, religion is man-made, spirituality is God-given. And that spiritual, they talk about recovery is based on spiritual conditioning. And that's like going to rooms, working with a sponsor, hanging out with the fellas. It's about, for me, it's proper alignment, body, mind, and spirit, taking care of your health and wealth of well-being and the recovery. And so what I'm about living, enjoying the spirit of life, living each and every day with my last, reaching for the gusto of life, getting the best of it, not letting it get the best of me. But I know on any given day it can get me. It's how I get out of self to find myself. And it's through the rooms of Narcotics Anonymous, or the ones, whichever one you choose to find. Thank you for allowing me to share.